The reactor hit lethal temperatures. The suits weren't rated for it. The human climbed in anyway. An hour earlier, the Iris Continuum drifted in undisturbed quiet through Sector Ilex 4, its gravity stabilization humming gently like a lullaby. The cargo vessel wasn't sleek or elegant, just a long, boxy spine of compartments, freight clamps, and heat shielding, but it was efficient, durable, and full of life. 12 species crewed the Iris, most of them veteran engineers or mechanics, bonded not by blood or culture, but by the shared monotony of long-haul systems transport. From the outside, it was just a blur of rusted alloys. Inside, it was a constant soft shuffle of translated chatter, diagnostic tones, and coffee brewing in 6 different formats. Marcus Hale didn't mind the isolation. He liked knowing where every bolt was. He didn't even flinch when the warning klaxon started. Reactor fluctuation, core temperature exceeding redline thresholds, Level 1 breach protocols engaged. The voice of the ship's AI, calm, clear, and indifferent, carried across the corridor as the lighting dimmed, shifting to emergency amber. Marcus set down his coffee, frowned, and jogged toward engineering. In Bay 2, 4 alien crew members were already gathered in front of the main reactor console. Their skin colors ranged from dull amber to deep green, and none of them blinked as Marcus entered. That was literal no eyelids. They were Vexari, a spindly species with elongated craniums and silken digits, adapted for fine tool manipulation. "What's the situation?" Marcus asked, already strapping on gloves. Chief Technician Rel shook his head. Core cooling sequence failed to engage. Automated systems are attempting a fallback loop, but pressure is rising too fast. There was a surge in plasma intake that overwhelmed the flow regulators, Marcus finished, stepping closer. "Yeah, I saw the maintenance report last week. We flagged that valve cluster as sticky. Did you try a manual override?" "Protocol forbids physical interaction at this temperature," Rel replied, tone clipped. "Thermal exposure would be lethal. Even the suits can't withstand the current heat index." Marcus glanced at the heat readout. It was climbing fast already, pushing past 900K. He did some fast math. The suits maxed out at 850K. Beyond that, they became ovens. "What about decoupling the regulator array? Could we—" "We're out of time," barked Commander Thalen over the intercom. His voice came through from the bridge. "Initiate full evacuation protocols. Countdown begins now. 5 minutes to total ship evacuation." A low rumble passed through the floor. Not a mechanical sound, something deeper, the kind that made your bones ache. Marcus looked at the readings again. The backup coolant flow, fully automated, had diverted to secondary junctions that didn't even exist. Or rather, didn't anymore. The last retrofit had removed them. The system was chasing ghost pipelines. The algorithm was too old to know better. "Rel," Marcus said slowly, "is the manual coolant valve still installed inside the chamber? The one behind the access plating?" "Yes, but Marcus, don't." He was already moving. Rel tried to grab his sleeve but missed. "You'll cook. The temperature inside is past lethal thresholds. Even the medbay won't be able to repair." "I don't need to survive forever," Marcus replied, opening the toolkit cabinet. "Just long enough to turn the damn valve." They all stared as he shrugged off his outer jacket, kicked off his Enviro boots, and replaced them with insulated work boots, nothing fancy. He slid a pair of grip gloves over his hands, picked up a crowbar, and slung a thermal wrench onto his belt. "You're not wearing a suit," one of the Vexari whispered. "Suits aren't rated for this heat," Marcus said, stepping to the reactor access hatch. "Why waste one?" "Why waste one?" A final alarm tone screamed overhead. 30 seconds to breach. The chamber hissed as the access lock disengaged. The Iris opened with a sluggish groan, releasing a blast of heat that made the Vexari recoil. The sensors on the outer wall blinked frantically, then went dark, overloaded. The hallway went silent, save for the pounding of Marcus's boots against the metal floor. Inside the chamber, the world was orange. Blinding, radiating heat poured from the core, a swollen sphere of pulsating light suspended in magnetic isolation. The containment shell was still intact, but the piping that fed coolant to its base had warped, twisted into bent, shrieking arcs of alloy. The automatic junctions were half melted, their servos jittering uselessly. Marcus dropped to his knees. Every movement felt like he was pushing through syrup. His lungs screamed. The gloves gave some protection, but not enough. When he gripped the first warped conduit to pull himself forward, pain shot through his arms like knives. He couldn't breathe properly. The calm in his ear came alive. "Marcus, you're spiking beyond tolerances. Get out of there." He ignored it. There was no time to explain that he'd been raised fixing vehicles in Arizona summers that could fry eggs on the hood. That pain, real as it was, didn't stop hands from moving. It just meant you had to move faster. He reached the primary valve cluster, a tangled set of 3 knobs, half melted together, and jammed the crowbar into the housing. The metal shrieked under the pressure. He braced himself against a shaking wall and twisted with all his strength. The bar slipped, slamming into his ribs. He gasped, vision swimming, then tried again. The second turn caught. Coolant hissed somewhere behind him, a faint reprieve. But it wasn't enough. Temperature slowed, not reversed. He coughed, nearly vomited, then forced himself to crawl deeper along the piping. His shirt had already scorched through in places. Skin blistered. Sweat turned to steam. Past, the first valve bank, was a crawl space lined with manual conduit links, fail-safes from an older design. Not meant to be touched. Not at this temperature. Marcus slid into the gap. The ceiling scraped his back raw. He screamed once, then bit down hard to stop the next one. His gloves fused to the piping as he gripped a warped support bracket and yanked it sideways, realigning the flow. A sudden burst of steam scalded his cheek. He kept going. Behind the core, the last junction was hidden beneath a panel buckled by pressure. He didn't hesitate, just slammed the crowbar into it, peeled it open, and reached in with bare fingers. Alarms stopped. Not all at once, but like a dying storm. One by one, they faded. The rumble under his knees lessened. The heat shimmer dimmed, just barely. Marcus didn't hear the voice calling his name through the comm. He collapsed against the frame, eyes fluttering shut. Seconds passed. Then minutes. When he finally crawled out, dragging himself by sheer habit more than will, the outer hatch opened to a crowd of stunned faces. The medics rushed forward, scanning, panicking, yelling words he couldn't follow. Someone touched his shoulder. He flinched, then relaxed when he saw it was Rel. Marcus blinked. "Did we lose the core?" "No," Rel said softly. "You stabilized it." The hallway was dead silent. Marcus's skin was cracked and raw, covered in second-degree burns. His lips were blistered, but he was breathing, alive. The alien crew stood frozen, not out of fear, but in silent, stunned confusion. Because he hadn't survived by accident. He'd known what he was walking into, and he'd gone anyway. Not because he wanted to die, but because someone had to fix it. Marcus lay still on the medbay gurney, his chest rising in shallow, even breaths. Patches of synthetic skin covered his arms and shoulders, held in place with microsutures that changed color when stressed. A thin oxygen mask was clipped under his nose. The burn gel beneath the wrappings was laced with mild sedatives and tissue accelerants. Every light in the room was dimmed to a warm blue. For 3 hours, no one spoke above a whisper in the medbay. The Vexari medic, Veth, moved with slow precision, cataloging vitals, flagging cellular degradation, checking for hidden internal collapse. At one point, she reran the scans just to make sure the core temperature data wasn't misaligned. But the logs were clear. Human biological thresholds had been exceeded for 17 minutes. Not seconds, minutes. She could not explain it. None of them could. The door opened behind her with a soft hydraulic hiss. "Status?" asked Commander Thalen. "He should be dead," Veth replied. Her tone was not angry or reverent, just factual. "There's no metabolic model that accounts for this. The dermal damage alone should have shut down nerve response. Yet the scans show coordinated motor function until he lost consciousness." Thalen stared at Marcus. His usual posture, straight-backed, arms folded neatly behind, was absent. He looked unsettled. His own blue-tinted scales had dulled to a mottled gray, a stress response his species rarely showed in public. "I watched the footage," he said quietly. He didn't hesitate. No speech, no dramatics. Just walked in. Veth nodded. "That's what's frightening." Thalen didn't answer. He approached the bed and looked down at the man who had stepped into a burning engine and walked out whole. Marcus shifted. It wasn't much, just a twitch of the fingers. A soft exhale, but it was enough. "Veth, check the monitor. Consciousness returning. We should sedate him again. He needs at least another 12 hours to..." No, Thalen said. Let him wake. The human stirred again, eyes opened, blinking under the low light. Marcus winced. Ugh. Tastes like melted pennies. Veth leaned in. Can you move your fingers? Marcus tried. Left hand? Okay. Right hand? Stiff. He flexed it anyway. Pain? About an 8, he mumbled. But manageable. Thalen stepped closer. Do you understand what just happened? Marcus took a moment, staring at the ceiling, the corners of his mouth twitching. I'm guessing I didn't die. No, Thalen said. You didn't. And you should have. Marcus glanced at him. That's supposed to be a thank you? It's supposed to be a warning. Veth looked sharply at the commander, but said nothing. Marcus slowly sat up. The wrappings across his chest pulled tight, and he hissed through his teeth. Yeah, I got the message. Don't play chicken with a fusion core. Believe me, I wasn't trying to be a hero. It just needed fixing. It was not your decision to make, Thalen said. His voice remained calm, but it had an edge to it. You violated multiple safety protocols, overrode departmental hierarchy, and subjected yourself and potentially others to catastrophic risk. Marcus swung his legs over the side of the gurney, groaning. And yet here we are, reactors stable, ships intact. That is not the point. Then what is? For a moment, neither of them spoke. Thalen gestured toward the viewport. Outside, the glow of the reactor still pulsed faintly through the structural glass. Do you know how long it takes my species to recover from burns? Marcus shrugged. No idea. 217 cycles. Our cells regrow slowly, deliberately. It is a survival trait evolved for environments where haste meant death. We do not rush. We do not improvise. We plan. And while you were planning, Marcus said, your core was melting. Thalen stiffened. You presume your recklessness saved us. It is not that simple. I don't presume anything, Marcus said, standing. He wobbled briefly, caught himself on the bed rail. I just saw a system stuck in a loop, failing to adapt to real conditions, and I knew I could fix it. So I did. Thalen turned away. You are not an engineer. You are a hazard. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it again. The heat of the argument, oddly enough, hurt more than the burns. Veth finally spoke, her voice softer than either of theirs. He saved the ship. Yes, Thalen admitted. But what does it mean when your survival depends on someone who refuses to respect the boundary between bravery and madness? Marcus sat back down, breathing harder now. His skin itched. Not healing yet, just raw, exposed. Tell me something, he said quietly. If I'd waited for orders, if I'd stood in that hallway watching your protocols cycle, would we be having this conversation? Thalen didn't answer. That was answer enough. In the hours that followed, word spread. The crew of the Iris Continuum was vast. Not a military vessel, not a deep science station, just a mobile freight platform designed for long-haul systems cargo. Yet stories still traveled faster than code. The human went in without a suit. He touched live conduits. He rerouted flow manually. He walked out. Not everyone believed it at first. The Urkani sensor techs argued it must have been a suit malfunction. The Suberan loader crew insisted no organic could survive those conditions without augmentation. But then the medbay logs leaked. Not intentionally, just a curious assistant pulling vital readings for a report. 17 minutes. Thermal exposure beyond any rating. No external protection. And yet, the readings matched a living being. In Bay 4, a small crowd gathered around the maintenance screen, replaying the chamber footage. Over and over again, they watched a human step into boiling light, crawl across a burning shell, and pull a warped valve with his bare hands. Some watched in awe. Some watched in silence. A few looked unsettled. Marcus was cleared for light movement a day later. The bandages itched worse than the burns had. He walked slowly, feeling the pull of healing skin across his back with each step. He found Rel in the auxiliary repair bay, bent over a scattered array of parts. Hey, Marcus said, voice hoarse. Did we lose the intake monitor? Rel looked up, his eyes dark, oval, expressionless, blinked once. You're not supposed to be up. Yeah, well. I got tired of pretending to sleep. Rel hesitated, then pointed toward the disassembled panel. The monitor fried when the core spiked. We're rebuilding the relay. Marcus lowered himself onto a crate. Need a hand? Rel paused, then, slowly, nodded. I could use someone to rethread the junction coils. Marcus started working. His hands still trembled slightly, but the muscle memory was there. 2 turns, slide, tuck, just like wiring a stubborn ground line back home. After a few minutes of silence, Rel spoke again. You didn't even flinch. Marcus kept threading. Didn't have time. Rel watched him. When you touched the piping when your gloves fused, did you think about the pain? I didn't have time to think about that either, Marcus said. Rel absorbed that. Do you humans always push through pain like that? No, Marcus said. But we do when it matters. Rel tilted his head. To who? Marcus looked up. To everyone who depends on the thing getting fixed. Rel considered this. Hands still. Your kind puzzles me. That's fair, Marcus replied. We puzzle ourselves sometimes. Later that evening, the bridge requested Marcus's presence. He walked in, expecting another scolding. Instead, he found Thalen seated, several department heads behind him. A projection hovered in the center of the room, a still image of the reactor chamber at peak heat, with Marcus's silhouette inside it. Thalen stood. We've reviewed your actions. While they violate multiple sections of interspecies safety code, they also prevented the loss of the Iris and all crew aboard. Marcus nodded slowly. So, I'm not fired? No, Thalen said, but there is a condition. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You will brief the engineering teams on what you did, step by step. Not just the actions, but the reasoning behind them. We intend to document it fully. Why? Because the next time a system like this fails, we need to understand what kind of mind steps into fire and walks out alive. Marcus frowned. It wasn't the mind that got burned. Thalen's mouth twitched. Not a smile, something else. That may be true, but the question is no longer how you did it. It's why no one else could. As the lights dimmed and the briefing began, Marcus realized something had shifted. Not just in the ship's power core, but in the room. In the way they looked at him now, not as a curiosity, but as a variable they hadn't accounted for. A reminder that sometimes, the safest system in the galaxy still needed a pair of human hands willing to get burned. Marcus Hale had never spoken to a room of over 50 alien engineers before. He'd expected cold stares, maybe quiet condescension, but not the rows of curious faces packed into Bay 3. They'd moved the briefing there because the engineering hall couldn't accommodate the turnout. Word had traveled far beyond the Iris continuum. Station mechanics from a passing resupply ship docked just to listen in. A few even asked to stand along the back wall. Marcus glanced at the holo projector again. It displayed a rotating 3D render of the reactor core's interior, complete with overlaid temperature data, conduit flow simulations, and biometric telemetry from the chamber's brief descent into chaos. His own vitals flashed in a corner like a ghost's signature. Rising heart rate, skin temperature climbing, blood pressure peaking, respiratory function near collapse. Thalen nodded to him from the side. Just speak clearly, he said, and don't attempt to downplay anything. They need the full picture. Marcus took a breath. He stepped forward, cleared his throat, and faced the crowd. So, he began, the first thing you should understand is, I didn't want to go in there. That got their attention. Even the bored-looking Grolic technician in the second row raised an eyebrow ridge. I wasn't trying to prove anything, Marcus said. I wasn't trying to die, either. I saw the valves were stuck. Automation had misrouted the coolant because the software hadn't been updated since the last retrofit. That was, 16 months ago? There was a ripple of nods. The system didn't know those pipes no longer existed. So, it thought the pressure had somewhere to go. It didn't. That's why the temperature climbed so fast. The backups didn't fail. They were just aiming at nothing. He gestured toward the simulation. I tried shouting it up the chain, but the command protocols were locked into evacuation prep. No one could authorize a manual override fast enough. A technician near the front raised his claw. Why didn't you just force a remote override through the diagnostics shell? Marcus blinked. Because the diagnostics shell was fried. The initial surge corrupted the routing table, and I knew that because I was the one who patched it last cycle when the circuit kept dropping. The technician lowered his claw slowly. Okay, Marcus continued. So I opened the chamber myself. I didn't put on a suit, because frankly, there was no point. The internal temperature had already exceeded suit tolerances by the time I reached the access hatch. Putting one on would have just delayed me and melted faster. There were murmurs now, some nervous, some astonished. "I knew I'd get burned," Marcus said. "I didn't know if I'd make it. I just knew someone had to go in before the core hit destabilization temperature. There was a 15-minute window before it reached runaway escalation." He pointed to the timestamp on the projection. "I went in at minute 11. Silence settled again. Then Rel stood in the back, his voice quiet but strong. "You didn't go in with backup." "No," Marcus replied. "There wasn't time. And you didn't ask anyone else to come." "No." A pause. Then Rel looked around. "You didn't give us time to argue." Older. That earned a few scattered smiles. Even a quiet huff from Thalen. The Grolek technician raised his claw again. "And when you touched the piping, you felt everything?" "Oh yeah," Marcus said, grimacing at the memory. The gloves gave out after the first grab. After that, it was raw contact. Every time I moved, I could feel the heat leaching through muscle. I'm not going to lie. It hurt like hell. Another silence. This one different. Not discomfort. Respect. After the briefing, the hallways filled with engineers discussing what they'd just heard. Not just what Marcus had done, but how many systemic blind spots it revealed. The evacuation protocol, they realized, had no contingency for a failed automation response. The assumption was always that either the AI could fix it or the crew should flee. No one had accounted for a middle ground, a point where human presence inside a malfunctioning core might still make a difference. Thalen called it a procedural vulnerability. The station engineers from the resupply vessel had a different term. They called it the human gap. 2 days later, the Iris docked at Karthus Relay Station for a systems audit. Officially, it was standard procedure after any near-catastrophic incident. Unofficially, every systems analyst in 3 sectors wanted a look at the human who climbed into a live reactor. Marcus was recovering well, but still moved stiffly. His burns were healing, though the skin along his arms and shoulders had taken on a pink, polished-tone new skin, fragile but strong. He sat through 14 interviews. One was with a sovereign investigator who tried to determine if he'd been genetically altered. Marcus laughed and said the only enhancements he had were from childhood tetanus shots and too many street tacos. Another was with a cultural sociologist who asked how Marcus's species psychologically reconciled the idea of certain death with voluntary action. Marcus stared at him for a moment before replying, we just do it anyway." In Bay 9, a team of multi-species engineers worked on integrating manual control junctions into all critical system schematics. They started calling them Marcus ports. Every one of them had a physical override valve reachable without AI clearance, accessible by hand, not meant for standard use, meant for the unthinkable, for the rare case when someone needed to act before the system realized it needed help. On the outer casing of each panel, a phrase was etched in 3 languages. For the one who goes in. The only one who hadn't spoken to Marcus since the incident was Thalen. Not a word. Not a message. Nothing. So Marcus found him. Late one shift, he tracked the commander to Observation Deck 2, where the massive viewplate looked out onto the drifting debris field they were charting. Thalen stood with his hands behind his back, perfectly still, his reflection stretched thin against the curved glass. Marcus stood beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Thalen said, "You shouldn't have survived." Marcus nodded. "You said that already." "I know." Thalen's voice was quieter now. "But I've been thinking about what that means." "I didn't plan on dying," Marcus said. "Just doing what needed doing. That's what troubles me. It's Stone 5 to dive." Marcus turned to him. "Why?" 2. Thalen stared ahead. "Because you weren't being reckless. You made a choice based on limited time, incomplete data, and probable death. And it worked. That's unsettling." Marcus waited. Thalen turned to him finally. "Do you understand how many of my people died because they followed Protocol too precisely? Because they believed the system would eventually course correct?" Marcus's brow furrowed. "I don't know. How many?" "Too many." They stood in silence again. Then Marcus asked, "So what now? Am I a walking threat? A glitch in your hierarchy?" Thalen's mouth lifted slightly. "No, you're a reminder." "Of what?" "That sometimes the only fix is to do the wrong thing very, very well." Later that night, Marcus returned to his quarters and found a small parcel waiting on his bunk. No note. Inside was a set of custom work gloves, heat-rated to 1500 Kelvin, reinforced at the knuckles, with flexible joints and a manual override chip woven into the cuff. They bore no markings, except for a small stitched phrase across the inside lining. In case it happens again. Marcus stared at them for a long time, fingers grazing the fabric. Then he set them beside his toolkit, and finally, lay back to rest. 3 weeks after the reactor incident, the Iris Continuum was busier than it had been in months. Not with cargo, not with repairs, but with visitors. 2 full diplomatic envoys had docked for onboard inspections. Half a dozen research specialists rotated through engineering to study the incident site. A fringe medical group requested Marcus's genome sequence for comparative resilience studies. They were politely denied. The Iris, once a forgotten freighter along the quieter lanes of the Ilex sector, now held a different kind of gravity. Not because of its cargo or routes, but because of the man who had stepped into fire and walked out with skin intact and logic blurred. Marcus Hale didn't want attention. He didn't want statues or ceremonies. He just wanted to go back to checking fluid levels and recalibrating diagnostics. But no one let him, not yet. He stood now, in the repaired chamber, the same reactor space that had nearly turned him into ash. It was fully cooled. The walls had been scrubbed clean of scorched carbon. Replacement panels gleamed with a shine that never lasted long on working ships. Rel stood beside him, holding a datapad. "It's odd," Rel said, seeing it like this. Marcus gave a short nod. "It looks smaller than I remember. That's a common trauma symptom, shrinking the scale in your mind." Marcus chuckled dryly. Could also just be that the fire made everything feel 10 times bigger. Rel's long fingers hovered over the datapad, hesitating. "You know they're naming this chamber." "Oh no," Marcus groaned. "Please tell me it's not something dramatic." Rel looked at him. "It's not. It's called Manual Access Bay 1. But the new procedural codex refers to this incident as a Type H response. H for human." Marcus winced. "Great. That's going to be a fun label to live with." "They debated calling it an M-class response," Rel added, tone unreadable. Marcus gave him a side-eye. "M for Marcus? M4. Makes no sense." They both laughed. A deep, real sound. Not tension-breaking, not awkward, just 2 engineers standing in a place that used to hold fear, now stripped clean and humming with repaired order. Rel set down the datapad and leaned lightly against the wall. "Do you know why your action has unsettled so many of us?" "Because I made you all look slow?" Marcus offered. "No. Because you made us look inflexible." Marcus turned to him. "You acted without approval," Rel continued. "Without certainty. That terrifies us. Our cultures evolved under the weight of caution. Every risk was filtered through consensus, procedure, hierarchy. And then one of you shows up and decides that danger isn't a boundary. It's a to-do list." "That's not fair," Marcus said. "We don't seek danger. We just don't leave the problem behind when it follows us." Rel watched him for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you." That night, Marcus walked the long corridor beside the port-facing windows. The stars out there looked exactly the same as before, indifferent, cold, comforting. He carried a small crate. Inside it, all the things that had accumulated in his quarters since the incident gifts, mostly. A ceramic model of the reactor, a set of heat-proof gloves with the Iris insignia, a necklace from the Xellan culture shaped like a closed loop, symbolizing survival. Marcus didn't wear necklaces. He reached the end of the corridor and tapped the crate against the waste processor's edge, then paused. He didn't dump it. Instead, he set it down on the floor, slid the lid aside, and looked again at what others had tried to give him. Each piece meant something. Not to him, but to the ones who gave them. Markers of astonishment, of fear transmuted into reverence. He picked up the gloves, the high-grade ones with reinforced knuckles and smart fibers, not the flashy kind. He kept those. The rest, he sealed in the crate again and tagged for common area display. If they wanted to remember, they could do it out there. Not in his room, not in his head. By the end of the 4th week, the incident logs had been formally closed. A complete documentation package was distributed to all Federation-linked vessels. A 30-page report on system failure, procedural lag, and emergency response. The final addendum was 1 sentence long. In the absence of viable automated options, a human technician manually re-established core function at direct personal risk. No embellishment, no poetry, just the truth, printed plainly, but it rippled. Within 6 cycles, over 100 ships filed revisions to their emergency protocols. Some introduced manual access paths. Others created provisional ranks for on-site human responders. Still, others simply added a note to their training modules. When conditions break the system, some species will break the rules. Marcus sat in his bunk, turning a wrench over in his hands. Not a fancy tool, just the one he'd carried in. Still heat-warped. Still scarred where it had slammed into the core wall. He hadn't cleaned it. He wasn't sure if he ever would. His door chimed. "Come in," he called. Veth entered, carrying a slim case. "I thought you should have this," she said, handing it over. Marcus opened it. Inside was a single MedScan sheet, laminated for durability. It showed his vitals from the incident: heart rate, blood oxygen, skin conductivity, and the raw thermal exposure over time. "Is this art?" he asked. "Call it proof," Veth said. "Some still don't believe you." "Let them not believe," Marcus muttered, then paused. "Wait, are they saying I faked third-degree burns?" Veth smiled faintly. "It's more that they can't process the idea. That you saw fatal heat and walked into it because the math made sense to you." He traced a finger down the chart. "It didn't make sense," he said quietly. "It just mattered more than I did." Veth looked at him. "That's why it scared us," she said. The final shift before the Iris departed, Karthus Thalen summoned Marcus to the bridge. The human arrived, expecting another update. Instead, the commander gestured to a view display. The stars had cleared. The path ahead showed a calm, open lane toward the galactic rim, skimming along a line of older stations that still used analog coolant systems. The Iris was taking on a side contract station recalibration, sensor alignment, emergency drills, the kind of work that needed someone who understood when to trust the system and when to tear it open with their hands. "You'll lead the engineering team on these runs," Thalen said. "You have operational discretion." Marcus blinked. "Wait, you're putting me in charge? Technically, you'll report to Rel for administrative chain of command, but the rest is yours. We need someone who doesn't freeze at anomalies." Marcus tried to process it. "Are you sure? I mean, protocol and all that." Thalen's voice was dry. "Consider this part of the updated protocol." They stood in silence. Then Marcus gave a slow nod. "I won't be reckless. I know. But I won't hesitate either. I'm counting on it." As the Iris detached from the station and began its slow arc toward open space, Marcus stood alone at the viewport, arms folded, watching the stars drift. He thought about the heat, the screaming sensors, the pain in his hands, the way the metal vibrated under his weight as he crawled across its burning surface. He thought about how no one had stopped him, and how, deep down, he hadn't expected anyone to. That was the real horror, wasn't it? Not that he survived, but that he'd never once thought it was the wrong call. He wasn't brave. He wasn't broken. He was just the kind of human who didn't wait for permission to fix the thing that might kill everyone else. Behind him, the ship hummed with stable energy. Systems read green. Crew logged in, all doors sealed, all readings normal. The crisis was over, but the questions remained. What made humans step into fire?